Excited for everybody to join us for our open house within River Middle School, and appreciate, as you know, as we're trying to find other ways and means that people can join and access the demonstration site. So we're glad that you can be here with us today. My name is Rena Marie Leon Guerrero. I'm an inclusion specialist here at the Hearing Center, and joined with our senior inclusion specialist, Cassie Martin, today. And I will hand it over to Principal Jonathan Judy.
Good afternoon. I guess we're not quite afternoon. Hi, everybody. Yeah. Good to see you all. My name is Jonathan. I'm the principal here at Hidden River. I've been here as principal for the last year, and prior to that, I was the assistant principal here for 3 years. So this is my 4th year at the school, and so a lot of the work that we'll kind of talk through today, and hopefully you'll get to see in action. I've been part of, a good part of this journey for 4 years here. Hidden River started our inclusionary practices journey prior to my arrival here. I have a special education background, so it kind of was like when I came on board, it was a great opportunity to kind of help leverage some of my own background and just in teaming with our special ed department and with with some of our general ed teachers as well, in terms of figuring out some of our strategies, putting a little bit more meat onto the structure of what was already happening. But a lot of the cultural work around the beliefs and some of the deeper work that we all know is so important to keep kind of at the forefront of what we do. That was a longer story than my involvement here, and so as best as I'm able, I will kind of tell parts of that story. But just, in terms of my particular involvement here, it's sort of been kind of the latter part of our story. So I'm really glad each of you are here. I'd love to I'm just going to pause and give you a chance to introduce yourself and where you are working, and kind of maybe as part of that, like something that is interesting to, some of your interests in coming here today in particular. So, and why don't I'm gonna call on one person, so I'll make it awkward for somebody, then it's your job to make it awkward for somebody else. So you guys get to call the next person in order. So I'm gonna go with Callie first. Welcome.
Thanks, lucky me. Well, you'll probably hear some similar things because this is all the other people are on our team, on my team.
Oh, okay, great. Cool. Awesome. So, okay, even better.
I teach at North Shore Middle School, and so do these other lovely humans. I teach English and also literacy interventionist, and so I'm coming in kind of in that role, and just curious on how you guys have been working with MTSS, and then also we have inclusionary practices that are coming, or rather growing in our school and our district too. And so
awesome.
Excited to see how you guys have worked together.
Great. Thanks, Callie. Nice to meet you.
You can go, Corey.
I'm Corey Wackerly. I'm one of the special education teachers at North Shore Middle School, and one of our special education department, co-department chairs too. And we've been working at improving our inclusionary practices and promoting a lot more co-teach in our school over the past 3 years. So next year I'll be doing co-teaching 6th, 7th, and 8th grade history. So and we have more co-teach coming. So kind of coming to learn more about how you guys co-teach and co-planning. That seems to be one of the bigger issues that we're having, is finding that time for co-planning and figuring that out. Yeah, just to hear more of how you guys are working to include some of your highest needs students in the general education setting. So, Sean, why don't you go next?
I'm in pretty much the same boat as Corey. I'm the other co-sped department head at our school, and I've been working on co-teaching for a few years. I co-teach with Leah, who's in here as well. We co-teach 6th grade English, and I've done science classes as well through the middle school. And I'm really just excited to hear, how we can improve things you've done that kind of streamlines inclusion and, makes it more of a building wide thing. I'm really looking forward to that.
Nice, thanks, John.
So I'll throw Leah in.
All right, well, North Shore Middle School, again, represent. So, yep, as Sean said, we have dabbled in co-teaching for a semester here, and we know that our class is going to get set up that again next year. We've worked with Cassie Martin throughout the year, so I feel like there's so much more to go, but it's nice to at least have a little bit of dabbling, I think, before we take our next steps. So anxious to learn next steps. 6th grade English, I think I forgot to say that. And Cassie Smith, you're up.
I'm up. I'm Cassie Smith. I also teach at North Shore Middle School, teach 6th grade, and I'm the ELL teacher here. So I'm not a co-teacher exactly, but the idea is that I'd like to be working more with teachers throughout our school in all subject areas. So I'm interested to see more about the co-planning and how all of that works together.
Awesome, thanks, Cassie. Yeah, we have a lot of kind of overlap in terms of strategies as well with our ELL population, and it's a major area of work for us. So I'll just call that out right out the front. So I think looks like Naomi, you're the last here to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Naomi. I'm one of the inclusion specialists on the demonstration sites team, and just excited to get to learn more about what's going on at the school and hear from everyone today.
Awesome. Great. Well, since you guys are all from North Shore, can you guys give me a little bit of context on how, like you've mentioned already having some co-teach partnerships, how long has that been going on? Just give me a little bit of history of your own journey at North Shore.
I started at North Shore in 2017, and I worked in. I was an LC teacher then, and they had just begun with students in the mid-level program, having them where they wouldn't have standalone classes or pull-out classes for science and history. So that year was particularly challenging for some of the students in those settings. So I became a mid-level teacher the following year, and we started co-teaching in 2018. So I've co-taught 7th grade history for 3 years, or this is my 3rd year. This is my 2nd year co-teaching 7th grade history. We have a 6th grade history co-teach going on right now, but I'll be co-teaching with a new teacher, a new 6th grade teacher next year that I believe we just hired. And yeah, a lot of it was at that time was the support students in the mid-level program and some of those gen ed courses, but now we're trying to broaden a little bit.
Okay.
Have more co-teach going on in some of the core subject areas, and 6th, 7th, 8th grade math. I believe next year in English we have I know we have 6th and 7th grade. I think we have an 8th grade English next year, and we'll have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science next year as well, which is great, but it's really only one section for each course that we have right now. So it's great, but there's a lot more students that could benefit from co-teach, but there's only so much FTE and planning time and co-planning time that we have to go around right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit, just structurally, you referenced that mid-level pro. So kind of what was this when you are talking like that? Give me a little bit more picture, kind of prior to that, what the different, I guess, categories were service-wise.
At the FSA is students with that typically spend the 80 to 100% in the gen ed setting. Mid-level would be your 40 to 79%, and we don't necessarily have FSA in our school, which would be the least include or the most exclusive, where they don't spend a whole lot of time in the general education setting. We also have a social emotional program too.
Okay, so really what you're talking about actually aligns with the LRE.
Yeah,
like somewhat at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. And then tell me about sorry, I know I'm asking you a lot of questions when
Oh, good.
you came to hopefully find out info from me. So, and we'll jump in with one of our team meetings here in a minute, but tell me about the origin of the jump, like from 2017 to 2018, like why did that occur at the time that occurred, and tell me a little bit about that story.
I guess it's one of those things that when I came, I'd moved from Ohio, and I wasn't all too familiar with it. Like after the work had started is whenever I'd realized, or it was brought to my attention that like this is new. So it wasn't really anything that that I was aware of, we were making changes that I didn't even know that we were making changes with at the time. But I believe it came down from the district that we needed to provide more instruction in the gen ed setting for students with disabilities. That one of the decisions that they made as a district was they were no longer going to allow mid-level classes to have pull-out classes for science and history. So
Okay.
that was kind of where it started, and
Yeah.
and so we've kind of spearheaded a campaign then to get more co-teaching, get more students in the LC or the 80 to 100 category, and try to get more numbers there
Okay.
for co-teaching and things like that, and reduce our numbers of students in academic labs.
Mm-hmm.
And really getting students with their gen ed peers as much as possible.
Okay. So are there still kind of an academic like pull out or around math and reading and writing, like this the core academic?
Yeah, there's still LC or learning center sections at each grade level for math and English, and there's still a mid-level section or mid-level sections for math and English as well. Those ones are mixed grade level. Those are mixed grade level though. If it's mid-level, like I'll have 6th and 8th grade students, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students in my math class.
Okay.
So yeah, there's still those. But what we're trying to do, especially for students in the LC sections, is if they qualify for math and reading, to get them in an academic lab and in the co-teaches.
Yeah.
And if they have a specific struggle in math or something, then maybe they would take an LC, like one LC course, but really trying to get those numbers down and limit it to one course to get the most help in the area that they need most.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. How was that received by North Shore when you kind of talked about like your involvement, Corey, when you moved here and you're like, I didn't know this is new. This is what we've probably been doing in Ohio for forever. But it combined with like district saying, hey, here's what we need to move toward. Tell me how that was received at North Shore amongst your colleagues and what you've seen in the couple of years since then.
I think like anytime there's change, there's going to be apprehension, but I think we've been thoughtful with how we communicate things, and I'd say like Sean and I have done a lot of this work, and we developed really good relationships with our colleagues, and they see the way that we work and understand the work that goes into it, to where I think it's starting to people are more open to it now. People are learning more about inclusion and the benefits of it, that it's not just that we're trying to get LRE numbers better, that like once you learn and you're thoughtful about the way that you do these things, that it's actually beneficial for everyone, and for gen ed students, for special education students, and for teachers and for the community, because whenever it comes down to it, we're all a community, and it's not going anywhere, like it's
right.
I guess so. It's what it's what's necessary to
Yeah.
evolve in this community that we're developing. So I'd say like it's a lot of hard work, and people are being, including ourselves and gen ed teachers, everyone's being asked to learn more, stretch themselves more in this capacity. But people are seeing the benefits to where, like, I'm starting to have students that would typically be more in special education, in the special education setting, that teachers are asking to have them in their gen ed classes and stuff like that, from seeing the growth and developing the relationships with the students and everything. Sean, feel free to hop in if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up. I mean, I think once we jumped in there, we kind of had to reinvent the wheel and didn't really know what to do. I know the first year it was just a 6th grade science class, and I mean, we're kind of just going about it, and slowly, it's more what co-teaching should be. It's more both of us leading parts of the lesson. There's more modifications and different levels and things like that. So I really think we kind of had to learn it trial by fire. But like Corey said, just by building those relationships and being positive, and when something goes wrong, laughing at it a little bit and just going, okay, let's revisit this and try it differently. I think that people are more open to it. I think that's why we see every year we have another section or 2 pop up, even though it's often perceived as just more work, and no one wants that. So I think it's really neat, and I think it'll keep growing, and hopefully we can get some more structures in place around it, coming from the top down.
Yeah.
I think what it's showing for us now too is that, like, the work that we're doing now, a lot of times it's a lot of work to start up, but as teachers learn how to interact with different students with different disabilities, and seeing some of the things that we do in the interventions, that it actually gets a little easier for the special education teachers, and that gen ed teachers get more comfortable at working with students with disabilities. And I think that the students in general, like in the general population, are very receptive to this kind of to this model.
Right, for sure. Probably don't have time to kind of hear from all of you, but that same question, Cassie or Leah or Kelly, I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on just kind of the landing of, like, if you take yourself back to 2018 and what that felt like, and kind of the quick summary, I guess, of the journey you've traveled since then.
Well, I can go. I can say that I came from Woodmore Elementary, where they have the FSA program there. So that population has always, been involved, whether they have, buddy classes or whatever it is. So I'm used to, thinking about that as an aspect of teaching. And then last year was my first year at middle school. And so, and then this is my first year where, the topic of 6th grade English being co-taught was approached. And so, so we just kind of jumped in, and even though it's not really actually a co-taught class in all of the, future, hopefully what we'll get to, we at least were able to kind of dip our toes in the water, Sean and I, and now we can know better what we can do for next year.
Yeah.
So I'm not very deep into the process at this school, but that's where I am.
Yeah. It sounds like your experiential knowledge of what you brought with you from Woodmore is a significant part of how you envision your classroom and what those classroom spaces can be for all kids. So it comes from that, coming from that experiential knowledge is a really powerful piece of this work. So we'll talk about that here as we kind of in pockets as we go along. So anyone else kind of want to talk about just what your perspective has been on North Shore's journey?
Yeah, I would just add that a lot of the, I would say, apprehension from gen ed teachers wanting to join in, and I maybe sped too, I don't know, but I know that there's a lack of structure and support to pulling this off, and time and actual capacity. So having training that is provided and growing our knowledge and how to do that. And so from what I hear from colleagues is a hesitation in that there's not structural support to make this happen. And it falls on our own shoulders to put in the grunt work unpaid. And that's a really sad frustration that limits where we can go when we know it's best practice, but how do we hold the line of what's, our professional, worth, right? Like we don't just need to work for free.
Yeah.
I think that's been a really big hurdle, is not having that structure from the top down.
Yeah, we've been kind of stuck in this. Like whenever we look at, we like Mary Friend's framework for co-teaching. And whenever we look at where we're at, we've kind of been stuck in this year one loop for quite some time now because of the amount of planning that it takes to pull it off and the amount of time that we get. Like just speaking from personal experience over the past 2 months, since like we moved back to hybrid, and now with recovery services and all the paperwork behind that. As far as like co-planning for my classes, I haven't had an opportunity to do very much, if at all, any of that work.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of time. Yeah. That's been asked of us to put towards paperwork and everything like that, to where I'm like not feeling like a very good teacher right now. I'm just pushing legal paperwork around.
Yeah. Okay. All right, this is a super awesome start to our conversation. I actually want to like jump right in on some stuff, but I'm keeping an eye on that time. I know I'd love to see you guys. We've got a team, our ELA 6th through 8th grade team meeting that's happening right now. They're doing an end of year kind of inventory of the essential standards that they taught, and then kind of what the student data are around each of those essential standards. The interest is, and it should be, fingers crossed, it should be disaggregated. So we should have some data points for how our ELL students performed, how our special ed students performed, because the interest is in kind of this transitional, like passing forward to the next grade level of what they're gonna sort of need to keep their eye on in terms of integrating those standards, especially after the year that we've had this last year. So that's kind of the focus of their meeting right now and their conversation. As part of that, the other sort of listen for and look for, we wanted you guys to be able to just see in action is their kind of, as they do that, having that conversation, what are the strategies that they relied on to get the data that they are sharing. Again, it's kind of that, so that teachers for next year are ready to kind of start digging into what standards they need to pay in particular close attention to, and what strategies to use, so, or not to use. I know that might not feel like it's kind of a flow with some of your questions, and my teachers texted me ready whether she's joining or not. So I kind of wanted to pause and give you, is that something that would, even though it's a little bit of a departure from the flow of conversation right now, I think what we could do is get in there for about half hour, and then we'd still have 45 minutes to an hour, as much time as you guys really need after that, to kind of talk about our story and what you're seeing is like a very specific structure around analyzing data that, and so I just didn't know if that would be helpful or not. So is it worth jumping in there still?
Definitely.
Okay. And that team is, there should be a special ed teacher in there. I'm not sure if our ELL teacher is in there today or not, but so I'm going to text her to jump in. And so you had mentioned structure, and just as we're waiting for her to join us, yeah, I can kind of talk about our team meeting structure. A lot of our story has taken place in the context of really intentional professional learning community, like the solution tree framework, where our teams are planning and doing all of their collaboration around those 4 essential questions around what do we expect every student to know and be able to do? How do we know if they've achieved it? What do we do when they haven't learned it? What do we do when they have? And so that's been a huge part of our identity the last probably 6+ years, is using that as our primary vehicle and strategy for moving forward. And then the inclusionary work has come within that context. So so anyway, that's kind of what you're seeing is one of those teams in the work that they're doing in that context. So Callie, do you have something you had?
I do. I just want to clarify. I watched one of your webinars right before this too, and so I one thing I didn't gather yet is this a school-driven goal or is this a district-driven goal? Because I haven't heard of Monroe doing other work like this yet.
Yeah, that's good. That was one of the contrasts I was kind of draw out when we do come back, is that this has been very school-driven here. So, hi ELA team.
Hello, everybody.
We are meeting with the North Shore Middle School team, so right up the road from us here. And by the way, you guys are like less than a mile from my house too. So we're close neighbors here in a few different ways. But who's in the room there, Miss Lampers?
So we have, I'm over here. Hi, I'm Robin Lampers. I'm Sonny Carlson. I'm Carly Green.
James Vasquez.
Christine Conrad. Hi there.
All right, so represented here are Tiana is our special ed teacher. Actually, dang it, I shouldn't have said that. I should have had you guys guess at the end who you thought it might be. But and it looks like Katie, our ELL teacher, is not there, but we'll, yeah. So
we had another meeting, so.
Got it. Robin, where are you guys at in your process right now? I'm just gonna kind of join you like wherever you guys are. I've already kind of given them what you guys are doing and sort of what to listen for as we jump in.
Okay, so we've been talking. First of all, we've been talking because this is the first time we're really doing this process. So we're talking about what numbers for sure we're looking at. So we're right now talking about 6th grade. Do you want me to share my screen? Will that?
Yeah, that, you know what? Yeah, you can, that's great. I was gonna say I could run some of the technical pieces if you want, but that's great.
All right, so we're working through right now 6th grade reading. And we're talking about the 3 essentials that we assessed and overall proficiency. And then we were talking about what types, anyway, our students with IEP numbers and our students that are ELLs and what their proficiency. So these are % of students who have met or exceeded the standard. So we're working right now on 6th grade, and we are so our special ed, so students with IEPs showed 100% of them showed proficiency. And then our ELL students, we had 67%.
Robin, do you want me to actually share the screen? That way you can just focus on your side and not worry about the screen sharing, or does it matter one way or the other?
Go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
You can keep going. I'll just jump in.
I'm trying to find the document. There we go. I was looking for it. There we are. Okay. So, all right, guys. So determining a theme. So Sonia, you had asked if that was our restart. Mm-hmm. So Christine, is that what you used for the theme? Proficiency? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have 69% of our kids met that one. And how many, what was the percent? We didn't have any We don't have numbers for students with IEPs. I only have 3 ELL students, and 1 of the 3. The other ones were so close. That's what hurt. It's so hard. So
Did they experience growth?
They did. Yeah, absolutely. Especially with theme is one of those things that's really hard because it's not concrete. And I think 6th grade is one of the first grades where they start delving more into the abstract. And so for students who are trying to grasp the language, dealing in the abstract like that makes it that much harder. So they did show growth, even just identifying what a theme is. So we, those were some of the strategies. So I really liked that the gallery walk, where they had, and I liked how we started with the choose which one is the theme, and then the next time we did it was write your own, and that really helped them solidify. So,
and they were really simple lessons to learn from it. Like they were all like moralistic stories,
right?
So it's really easy to pick up what the theme is going to be.
Yeah, and I think next year having them in the building from the beginning of the year, hopefully, with doing that earlier would solidify it even more, because then when we do read our novels, we're just reviewing that every time.
Yeah.
So that's a huge thing to make sure that we remember to do that early enough like right away in the year as we're introducing what theme is.
I think the interesting thing about doing that too is when we were doing it with our ELL kids, you could see them processing the information and taking everything in a very literal sense, and having difficulty drawing an inference to draw the thing, because you could see I just was, Carlo, and he's like, I said, are you trying to figure out the word and what word it would be in Spanish for English? And he's like, I'm like, okay, let's just take that for a moment. I'm going to explain it to you, and then we're going to move on. But it was really like, that was where I really saw how difficult, do you know what I mean? Like reading these really short stories, and he was processing that information in a visible way.
Yeah.
Where I was like, wow, this is like really educational for me to go, holy smokes, like this is how he's processing information all the time.
Right.
But to see it like in action was a very different, and I don't know that I would have seen it any other way other than those really short blips that we were reading.
And having them out in the hall helped me see who's spending more time on which stories. Because when they're working in the classroom, you have no idea what number they're on. But when they were physically moving from one story to the next, that was powerful. Some kids zipped from one to the next, and other ones just stood at one story for the longest time. And that, to me, was something I hadn't ever thought of before. Not being able to tell what number they're on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so are we done with theme? Do we want to move on to the next essential?
What did you have data for our students who are STEM and ELL?
We do not for that one.
Oh, okay.
We haven't broken it down.
Got it.
We
You said you did for your ELL, Robin?
I did for mine, yes.
Okay.
It was one third of that.
33%. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it's Jonathan. It's not God.
Does it? Did I sound like God there? That's very interesting.
All right. So our next one was drama, plot, and then character change. This was our lowest percent, and 56% of overall the students. And I can say confidently that that number would be much higher had we been in the building when we were reading that book.
Absolutely.
A lot of the low numbers were because they didn't do it or
Was that over Zoom totally, not during hybrid?
over
Yeah,
Zoom
that was
totally.
awful. But you know what's really fun about that is seeing now after reading Love That Dog
Yes.
and how much they're like, oh my gosh, like at the beginning of the story, I mean, they're so excited to discuss how he did develop
Yes.
over the course of the story or a poetry poem.
Right.
It was just like, I'm like, oh, and this is that point where we're like, we gotta go back and go, did they get it?
Yes.
So that's,
Now they have
Tiana
it.
and I made an assignment for Love That, or it's the same exact one that we had for Restart.
Yeah.
The only thing I changed was instead of signpost, I just said quote. So it's what was the character like in the beginning? What quote can you use to prove it? What were they like at the end? How can you prove it? And then what made them change? How can you prove it?
I love
And
it.
we're gonna assign that Monday, Tuesday.
So those are gonna be the, well,
So
everyone has
should-
the opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so everyone has the opportunity to
Go back.
go back.
Yeah, because I think that.
I'm excited to
much
see that
higher,
number go
much,
up.
much higher.
Yeah.
So then, will you use that attempt to change their standard
Yes.
grade?
Yeah, absolutely.
That
Because they are immediately picking up on that. He's changed so much and so
And-
that's been,
And recognizing the change as the story was going on. Oh, now and you know what else was really great was drawing all those inferences. Then they're
yes.
drawing these inferences about him and how he's changing because of the text, which is just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're together.
And not only just like, oh, he didn't like poetry and now he does.
Yeah,
It was very much like, well, he's liking it here, but he's not liking it again
Mhm.
here. But then he's going back to it and he doesn't want to put his name on it. So it's like they could even track like the smaller changes, not just he doesn't like it or he likes
Well,
it.
and it wasn't even he doesn't like it or he likes it. It was he's not feeling confident.
Confident.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He's not sure about what he's doing. And then relating that to their own life, like, yeah, there's been times where I'm like, I don't know about this poetry, but maybe and then like when we were doing use the different words, they're like, I don't know if this is a poem, but I think this is exactly it. This is what we're hoping for.
Well, and another thing that they picked up on was his understanding of what a poem is. So we inferred as a class that that his understanding of what a poem is that it must rhyme and follow a certain pattern and a rhyme scheme. And as he's going through the story, he's like, this is a poem. So just be careful with your words and choosing words that makes it a poem. And so there's a lot of different levels of the character that they're finding. So I'm wondering, Christine, if Love That Dog would be a good first book
I was wondering that same thing
for
today.
next year
Yeah.
and switch that.
Yeah.
Start with a really short, we could, not a lot of words.
Super accessible.
Yes, super.
Pretty much every one of our students could read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And relate
And
to
relate to
different parts of it, like relating whether they had a dog or relating for being really self-conscious or something, or not feeling confident in something, or having something that was hard in your life, or the idea of I really want something, but I'm really worried I'm not going to get it, so I'm going to make all these excuses for why I might not get it. And I mean, it was just like just a delight.
I know. We went a long time.
Yesterday when we read the poem about how his dog passes away,
Yes.
everyone's hands are going up. Like, oh,
they all have
this is
a story.
They all have sad stories, and I was like, I'm sharing them. I was like, I can't take this anymore. Like, no.
Turn and talk, tell your neighbor your sad story.
A lot of people have really good ideas.
You should have done turn and talk. I felt bad to pick them up, but I was like, I'm gonna start crying.
Yeah. No, why don't we leave that poem like here? So
I know, I was already like losing it a little bit.
Okay. Are we ready?
You guys, super quick question. Sorry to interrupt. Any really specific strategies that you guys want to capture here? I think like you could maybe dump them just for the sake of preserving
Yes.
for next year. Maybe just use those lines below since we
There we
since
go.
you
I'll
fill
put
that
it
out.
below the essentials not covered part.
And then can somebody actually it probably has to be you, Robin, huh? I'm wondering if you could give an example of one of the rubrics in terms of any of those standards. Is there a rubric example that we could put in the chat that these guys could access?
Not for reading. They have some for writing.
Okay.
So we're making the transition right now to writing.
Gotcha.
So theme gallery walk, begin the year with love that dog.
And I think specifically the assignment that Sonia made with the instances and repeating that was really helpful.
Repeating it over and over. Because by the fourth time they did it, they were like, oh.
They were
Right, there was no
every
hesitation.
like
Every kid that was there got a 4 on that.
Yeah.
Because they made their own inferences. Like I just read it to them. We didn't even make any inferences together as a class. So
loving that. Yeah.
yeah.
Very cool.
And they needed, especially the SPED kids needed a lot of, not all of them, but needed a lot of support at the start and nothing.
Well, and I had a lot of kids giving explicit evidence.
Yeah.
Like he hates poetry because he says, I hate poetry. That means he hates poetry. I'm like,
No.
So once we talked about that, gave them feedback the next time, and there were a couple of kids as I was reading raised their hand. Mrs. Lampers, I'm going to make a not an inference. Make them say something that was explicitly stated just as a, as we were.
That's so fun. I love the engagement.
Yeah. Okay. Writing.
So first was narrative.
Sorry, can I just really quickly, there was a question that I may have led this group astray on in the back. Can you guys just give a quick, and then I know you want to move into the writing. So tell us about how the proficiency was established then in terms of these particular reading standards. Because I had referenced a rubric. I was sort of imagining, I think the one you did for objective summary, which I know we always go back and forth on. Is that a writing? Is that a reading?
Right. Okay. So we do have. So what we did was we sat down and calibrated. We talked about, and we didn't necessarily put it in a rubric, but we had, we shared examples of what the kids gave as answers and then calibrated together. We showed each other what we had found, and then we calibrated that way rather than putting it into a rubric, because this is, so Christine and I, it's our first year doing 6th grade and Sonia's 2nd year. And so we didn't necessarily have time to put it into a rubric, a beautiful rubric. There, we'll say that. So for reading, we did more calibration and reading each other's responses from students and having students see each other's as well. So sharing exemplars was a lot of the way that we did it with the reading with these 3. So
awesome. Okay.
But
great. Thank you. In that, what's just sort of you think about next year, what do you guys think is next in terms of maybe not strategies, but in terms of really like understanding your data? Like what comes to mind as you guys think about your growth as a team and where you want to head with some of the reading work that you specifically built the foundation on this year?
I think that's what we were talking about in terms of looking at how kids responded to Love That Dog and what we learned about our students from reading this with them, and using that as the start point next year to give us like the foundation of where they're at. Does that make sense? So in terms of what our takeaway was, is we learned that they were able to have access this, I can't speak, able to access this in a better way that gave us more information on where they're at. And so I think using that as a starting point next year will help us then determine next steps with them and what we do need to focus on and what we might pull back on.
Okay. Yeah. And developing some of those proficiency scales in a much clearer, like archiving some of those things, because we noticed when there were things available to us, but they weren't necessarily across the grade, like all teachers used it.
Right.
So we wanted to solidify some more things for 6th grade, and we changed some things up because this year, one of the big things that we learned as a vertical team was how 6th grade can be more foundational in order to support the learning that takes place in 7th and 8th grade, and making it more cohesive 6th through 8th, rather than we've done a lot of great work, but in separate grades and grade teams. And as a vertical team, we worked incredibly hard this year, making it more aligned. So we did change some things up from last year. So there were a lot of things that hadn't been created yet that we would need. And so those are next steps for next year, and making it more of an archive, like, so that when teachers do change, it's already there.
Yeah.
So
great. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Really quickly, North Shore, I just want to make sure, are you guys able to hang on here until 1:30? You got, okay. I just want to make sure we have enough time for our debrief. So I think what we'll probably do, you guys, is listen and keep listening in on the writing side here for this transition. Then we'll probably pop back out and let you guys continue for the other grade levels. So
okay.
Awesome.
Oh, okay.
All right. I'm gonna stop yapping at you.
Well, so this will be kind of quick. We haven't met as a writing team to bring our data together.
Oh,
And
okay.
I don't know where that was.
Carol's not feeling well, so
okay.
she, okay.
Okay.
But we
well,
did for narrative. I'm sure I did that for narrative.
I didn't total it. Did you total it?
Oh,
okay.
Is there a grade level that is ready to go with that, and then we could focus on that grade level for the writing pieces, and that way these guys can see this process in motion one more time.
It might be beneficial to look at the checklist and rubric that we did have for 6th grade, since they just asked about that. But if you'd rather us move to a different grade level, we are much more prepared at our other grade level teams, I think. So what would you rather us do, Jonathan?
What do you guys want to see? Honestly, whatever feels valuable to the North Shore team here.
Would you send? I don't have those rubrics.
Mm-hmm.
Can you send me the rubric and checklist for narrative? So I'm going to actually embed them here.
Leah, you are the one, I think, right, that is asking about the rubrics. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, that's something that came to my attention this year, is that there was a inclusion student that we had, that she was like a kindergarten, 1st grade level. And I was just lost on how in the world do I assess and grade that. And so admittedly, it was just very kind grading and not really valuable grading.
Yeah. So that's actually a big, huge area of work for us still. I think what we're trying to do is, and you even heard it from Robin saying, that's one of the areas of work next year for some of the reading. We can't do it all at once, right? So as we get better at each thing, it might be one unit, everything's sort of fully built out, and then just kind of take it like one thing at a time. And so, what I heard Robin say was just building out those proficiency scales on the reading piece. Well, once you build a proficiency scale, exactly what you're saying, Leo, we recognize, this doesn't fit all kids in all situations. So how do we really capture growth when that growth is happening like within level 1 learning, and so we actually have that's one of the giant things on the whiteboard behind me of pulling a team together and looking at grading practice. We've already done a lot of work on our grading practices in general, but specifically looking at kind of a model for like an expanded scale for how we capture that growth, because I think what we have used and realized its shortcomings is like when we need modified grading using like the SU option, and that just doesn't give anybody information that the type of information that we need. So it's not really serving anything, you know?
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
so that for us, what we're looking at is taking that and like, here's our core 4-scale rubric or 4-level rubric. And what does that look like if we were to like stretch that out? So,
Right.
and we haven't
And
figured out how to do
so-
that yet, but.
Yeah, and that's where I'm like, well, there's IEP goals, and then there's
And-
6th grade standards, and where do the two meet?
And we do a lot of work with the IEP goals
Mhm.
for students with IEPs, especially those that are significantly lower.
Yeah, and for the most part, we try to make the IEP goals align with the standard in some way.
Yes.
Whether it's a small piece of the standard or the full standard, depending on what level the student's at.
Okay.
And our IEP, our SPED team has done a really good job of making the IEP goals relevant
Mm.
so that we can use,
Like, for example, really common for 6th grade is paragraph writing that'll include topic sentence, evidence to support the topic, and elaboration. And so those are 3 checkpoints that they can just focus on. Like, the rest of the class might be working on 3 or 4 paragraphs, but you can really target for 1.
yeah. So I just put a link in for a checklist for 6th grade.
Ooh.
And then if we go back to the folder, the rubric was in there too.
Oh, I'm requesting access right now.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Classic, right?
I wish that was the default. was to
I
give you
know.
access.
Yes, I wish to.
But try to make a copy before you make any changes.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just reading the comment. I love the idea of learning progressions aligned to standards for the IEPs. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And part of that is like you kind of start melding a lot of frameworks, right? Like we've got our PLC framework, and that's a big anchor for us. And some of the co-teaching and co-planning models that you guys have even referenced, Corey. And then I think the other piece is MTSS, right? So we actually think about MTSS even within our special ed population. So if you're taking just our special ed students, our continuum of services we have on an MTSS model, right? Like some of what we're doing should, or kids have access to information and opportunities for learning that we know is going to impact 80% of our special ed students. And then what are we doing for the kid that other 20%, right? What's our tier 2 within special ed? What's our tier 3 within special ed? So there's that applies like in how we think about IEP goals, right? In terms of like the goal is to have those goals be for all kids, and we know that 80% of kids are probably going to reach those goals, but other students may have some other needs as well. So I'll get into that more in the debrief. So you guys ready to kind of go down the writing path here? I think we'll probably hang in here for about 10 more minutes and then jump out so we have enough time to debrief. This team has some awesome questions, so I want to make sure we give them a lot of time there. So.
Okay, so we'll move to 7th grade
That's okay. I think we're
writing. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
totally fine.
Okay.
Do you guys have any questions about the checklist? We could talk about it for a minute if it's helpful.
Oh, do you want me to pull up the checklist?
I think Robin hyperlinked it into the chat box.
Okay, here
Yeah,
it's shared here now too. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So
then
just real quick, the way we went down the road of assessing kids for writing also as a first year team was we looked at the standard and we broke it down into skills for this checklist so that students could see more objectively what they needed in their writing. And then the scoring, again, we tried to move from like the subjectiveness of writing to some sort of objective way of scoring them. And so at the bottom of the checklist, we included how many things on the list that they would get in the skill area to earn at, above, near, or below standard. And the way we came up with that like really simplified scoring method was looking at the SBA check sets and trying to identify what did a 1 look like, what did a 2 look like, a 3 to 4. And then we took the SBA rubric and put that in kid-friendly language. But this was what we primarily used to score kids versus the rubric, because the rubric is a little more subjective and pretty complicated. So we wanted to try and make it more concrete. So that's 6th grade writing in 1 minute.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, well done, very nice.
Yeah, I like how simplified and clear that is.
Yeah, and then just for another like sped perspective, it made it easier to pick and choose like what skills to work on, because depending on the level of the student, maybe that was too many. And so you could really like target specific things of, oh, they got this, we don't need to work on this. Oh, this one is nice to know, but we don't need to know it. But this is one that, okay, we need to focus on this area.
Yeah.
And it was easy for us as a team to identify, okay, what should we teach first? So we did a pre-assessment and then we scored them with this checklist, and we saw, oh, most students didn't include dialogue. That needs to be our first teaching lesson. And then we just went down the list from there on how to intervene.
Okay. All right, Tiana.
So you said the narrative skills checklist you just shared with us is also in the handbook somewhere. I still am having trouble hopping in.
No, I don't think that one is. So what I'll do is put that on the document for, here, let me get back to it. I'll put that on today's document that we've shared just in the chat. So
Great.
I think the sharing settings still need to be changed.
here, let me do that really quick.
Yeah.
And as we go, I'll be adding all those artifacts that are shared in the chat into that master document. So we'll make sure you have all that.
So if you want us to share with you other things that we have, it just, if you wanted, was that Leah that we were talking to that was asking questions? If you want to like give us your
email,
put your email in the chat.
Yeah.
We can send more things like that, and you can ask questions through email.
Love it.
What grade do you teach?
6th grade English.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. So I was like, oh yeah, that's a great
one. Get on it, Sean. All right. So I will send it to all of you. So if you all give me your emails, I can.
No, I mean like send us all the good stuff you've got.
Oh, all the good stuff. Yes, I can do that.
We'll do that. It's so fun. Why not?
We all work together so we can easily share it between us.
Okay.
Send us all
All right.
the good stuff.
Okay, so we will pull a bunch of stuff together. Oh, thank you, Rena Marie. And then, so we'll pull a bunch of stuff together and send it to you that way. And
Thank you.
And please also know that a lot of the good learning for we teachers takes place in the process of developing. Yeah. So don't just take what we've created and then use it, because that's not always the best way to, like, you learn so much just through the process of developing it.
For sure.
So, all right. So I didn't want you to think that.
Well, it's lovely to start from a base, right? And then modify to your needs. So that saves a lot of time when you can see someone else's good thinking and model it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, and that's really where we started with 6th grade, because we all, Christine and I teach 8th grade, Robin had taught 7th grade. So we're like, okay, what do we have that we've really collaborated on our grade levels that now we can bring down to the 6th grade level? And that was a really sweet basis for us too.
It really was.
Now we'll just build on it next year.
Yeah.
I think that has been probably one of the biggest benefits working together as a vertical team, is really having an understanding of 6th, 7th, and 8th grade and where our kids coming from and where we actually eventually sending them to. I think that was super beneficial in creating all of this. is really like when we were talking about some changes we've made earlier, like our 6th graders were doing race before and now they're doing TEE. 6th grade or 7th grade was using notices and notes, and now we're bringing it across the grade level. So having that, being able to look at that as a full team and going, where do we start filling the holes that we're seeing between the grade levels, that we're making assumptions that the kids have that they don't have, has been really helpful in building all of this out.
And that we're calling that a win from COVID, because it was not something we tried for several years. We worked really hard in our grade level teams, but it was hard to find time for our vertical alignment. And we tried, and we did some great breaking down of standards vertically and those sorts of things. And that was incredibly helpful. But this year we were forced to work together as a vertical team because many of us were on 2 teams, 2 grade level teams. So we're, that's one of the blessings of
absolutely
what we first viewed as an incredible hardship. and then we're like, that really was, yeah, good. So. It's true, man. Speaking truth. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Okay. What's next? Anything else? Do you want us to go? We all kind of have other meetings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of running into where we're trying to get some time debriefing as well. So I think you guys have seen the process, right? Like that's kind of what the whole goal, and then just being able to interact. I mean, that's probably more beneficial than anything, honestly. So ELA team, thank you so much for being our fishbowl here today.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Oh, we'll send you
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks a
guys.
lot.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, I'm gonna stop sharing for now, but we can pop back into that. So, all right. So here's what I'm thinking. And I normally don't really structure it. It's a little bit more of a conversation, but I want to come back to a few things that you guys were talking about when you were telling your own story, and just be able to tell our story. So it's a little bit more presentation-y than I was even, I think, sort of imagining. But so I don't know, I just kind of felt compelled that I need to kind of do the same, you know, to give a little bit more context, because like I said, we've been at this, I think 5 years in terms of the co-teach. So being able to pick out the pieces that are valuable for you now at this point in your journey, I think is going to be really a critical part of your outcomes today. So so if I were to backtrack a little bit, there's really 2 stories that get told here a lot. One, Brett Willie was the principal that I worked with here, and he's now moved to Monroe High School, so he's there. And he really kind of spearheaded this work, in particular around our collaborative structures, right? So that was his passion, and his lens and vision for Hidden River was the role of collaboration, and as our primary vehicle for moving the school forward. The story that gets told around here is when his first year of getting here, I don't know if it was a quarter mark or a semester mark, he pulled all of our like F's grade data, and they realized, they did a comparison with the high school, which is 4 times the size of our school. And there were more F's here at Hidden River than there were at the high school at that particular like grade marking period. And so it started that conversation of just asking people why, you know, what's the benefit, what's the harm that's being done, who is it harming, who is it benefiting to be having a system that's set up this way. That ironically, that did not lead to a conversation about how do we address our grading practices. Like that sort of got shelved, but that was our entry point, was just using that data to look at, is this the school, to ask the bigger cultural question, which is this the school that we want to be? And so that brings me to a question that is frequently asked around here that he posed then, and I think really became kind of the, whenever we get sideways or turned around or disagreeing, we come back to the question of, are we building a school that we'd be proud to send our own kids to, that these are all our kids, and that shared ownership, just personalizing that to our own students. There's a lot of passion around here kind of wrapped up in that belief system. And and I'll come back to that question here in a few minutes. So that's one story. And they started really digging into the idea of like, okay, if kids are not successful in middle school, if they don't have the basic things that they need in middle school, what happens to them? Like what happens in high school and what happens beyond? And just sort of looking at it, it's a little bit like, I don't know, it's just a little bit like doomsday-ish, maybe. I don't know that we would still kind of approach it that way if we were to do it again, but that was what started the story here. So the other story that gets told is within that same, probably within a year of that conversation starting and really having people kind of develop some core beliefs around, do we really believe that all students can learn? And why or why not, and a lot of those conversations happening. We had two special ed teachers who came to Brett at that time and said, look, doing pull-out classes, and they said, we don't have the materials that we need. These materials that we have that we're expected to deliver to our students are at like first and second grade level, and they're totally disengaged, and there's no motivation for why students should be learning and progressing. And then kind of as part of that conversation, not only are those materials what they were, but they don't have any access whatsoever to general ed settings. And for us, it was always core academics. So they always were in science classes. They always were in electives, but math and the ELA, our ELA is blocked here. So social studies, English language arts are part of the same block time. And yeah, so lack of access to quality materials, lack of access to, and so those two teachers really drove kind of that conversation of, is there a way that we can start getting students, and it started with a small group of students, and it started with one class period where they just figured out a way to arrange, okay, just go, like no structure, no support, no training, no, just why don't we try it? Let's use this group of students to kind of see how it goes. So that was really, I think, the second half of maybe 1 year, and I'm kind of losing track. I need to create a timeline actually, so I'm a little bit more specific on when that is, but so that's the second story. This first one about grades led to this questioning process of, is this the school we want to be? What does it look like to build a school that we'd be proud to send our own kids to? I think that really drove this shared ownership piece. And then having our special ed teachers really be advocates of this idea of, they've called it co-teach all the way along, but I think it probably for a lot of years, the first few years, was much more of like a push in, right? We didn't have structures set up, we didn't have co-planning, we didn't have those things. So looking back, it's probably more of like, we just wanted to kind of rip the Band-Aid and get kids into accessing core classes. So I think along the way for us, coming back to your guys' question of, like, is this district, is it school? Hidden River has owned this work because it bubbled from underneath, right? And we've hit different parts of our journey where certain things, I've mentioned grading practices a couple times. 2 years ago, we had a group of teachers that came to us and say, hey, we're trying to align the standards, and what we're doing grade wise, it doesn't work. They don't align. Like, we got to figure out. And so it started a 2-year journey, and it's still a mess, to be honest with you, but and you could even see some of that mess, right? Like we're a little bit unclear on like, how are we gathering data that's really valid, to the point where I'm like, yeah, that's not a great, that's great as far as like the student facing version, but we still know that we need to have like a really clear spine that we're coming back to make sure that we have more backing for our calibration than just like comparing work samples, for example. So, and anyway, so that's another example, I guess, our grading practices that a couple of years ago. So there's sort of culturally this mentality here, a couple of things that you're maybe gathering. It's very much of using the results on the ground and using people's experiences and observations to drive the work, right? Like that's a cultural thing that has become embedded here that is anchored to this overall all why of owning all kids. Like the belief of all kids can succeed, and where we are sideways with that and where we're not experiencing that, it just means that we haven't yet created the system that wraps those kids in. And I would say also the other thing I was going to say about that question of is the school that we're trying to create, we don't know what that school looks like. None of us experienced that school. So it kind of takes the air out of the balloon of some of the tension that arises in our staff of like, you're expected to know this or do this, or you know, it's that permission to take risks, and it's that permission to the PLC framework. The phrasing there is learning by doing, right? Jumping in, letting the student data, letting the results speak for themselves. We're going to learn what we need to know by jumping in and doing the work. And so that idea and giving permission to people to just saying, you know, we're not holding you responsible to know now what to do. We know we have an issue we need to resolve, and we've got to jump in and try something, and then we'll be able to build the system and the structure along the way. So I think there's this tension that I'm hearing from you guys around the structural elements, like what technical pieces need to be in place. But for us, our story has been, we will lead with the cultural beliefs piece every time, and then we'll find a tool when we need it to support that. And so that creates a very messy system, but like if you were to just kind of take a slice of the pie at any given moment, that looks and feels very messy. But I think what we've seen over time, and you know, some of the resources that we do have out there and have been put together, I think it's important to kind of note, like every single one of those structures is something that developed at a particular point in time to fill a particular need. So to just say, hey, let's go build the whole system, we're never going to get there. And so I guess I would just say, like for us, the biggest thing we've learned is that power of always attuning to the cultural and the beliefs work, you know, far more than some of the technical pieces. So a big part of that is keeping that alive is student stories. So one of the things that you didn't, I guess you heard a little bit generically, but we will start every meeting with celebrations and student stories. And I get frequent emails from teachers highlighting and saying, hey, such and such student just accomplished level 3 on linear equations, and they have, you know, they have learning disability. They've been working at it for a year and a half, and they just got it independently. You know, like they just showed their proficiency. And just keeping those student stories is what has helped, honestly, keep this work real and remind ourselves on why we're doing it. So. All right, Cassie, I gave you a little bit, you had prompted me kind of on that, some of the cultural why. I don't know if there are other parts of our story that, since you're familiar with it, if there's anything else that I've left out that you feel like I need to highlight.
No, I mean, I just think, you know, I kind of put in the chat, like, you know, there are these two really critical pieces, and there are issues when the district doesn't have the structures and supports to help people. So, and I know that in North Shore, there's some really robust structures that are in place district-wide, especially around special education programs. But, you know, at Hidden River is evidence of this, and we talk about this in our demonstration sites work, that the research tells us in order to make that school-based change, really there's some different components. One was that kind of that foundational why that Jonathan was just talking about. It's also that innovative site-based leadership. So a leader that's willing to be innovative, you know, think about things in different ways, but also engage stakeholders in the process. So, you know, educators, families. So there's these layers that kind of need to happen, one on top of the other, to facilitate this movement. But I believe Corey, Corey, you said this earlier, it's that thing that you start recognizing, which I think builds that momentum, is that, the front loading piece at the beginning, and you'll see, and Callie, I think you said you watched Hidden River's introductory webinar, and I was just actually going back through some of the slides because I was seeing if they had a timeline, Jonathan, on there, if you had one. But it does go through those, but it goes through those major components of what you really prioritized, at the beginning, and it's an incredible amount of work, and it's still hard work, but you do have more systems to fall back on. So you have these systems to fall back on, and then what ends up happening is what Corey was saying, is you have happier, more engaged students, right? You also have happier and more engaged educators. And then what happens, that builds the momentum to keep this moving forward, to keep that momentum going.
And the bridge, I guess the connection I'll make now is coming back to what I said I'd want to come back to, Corey, earlier over the chat. Just that, like, right there, that's like a, I don't know, what match, right? Like that's a splitting hairs on this is my time, this is your, so that's where, like, the attunement to the cultural work around a shared vision and a shared why for this, for us, because the vehicle has been collaboration and that PLC work, when there is prep time, people don't necessarily think of that as individual prep time, even though that's their right? Like that is absolutely their right to have that. People need that. And they know, like, when the time that we're doing this collaborative planning, they're basically doing what they would be doing on their own anyway. They've just made the decision to focus on those things together, right? So that's a cultural piece where they're not being asked necessarily to give up their own individual planning time. So that, I think there's pieces there where the more we can attune to that cultural piece, some of those other logistical things tend to take care of themselves, because it's the question of what is this going to take to pull this off, and people opt to spend their time engaging in that collaborative work. So then it allows for a lot more flexibility on a school staff. Even the thing like I made earlier, like one of our co-planning structures is, and you saw Tiana was in that meeting, is during a PLC meeting, our special ed teachers are with their academic general ed peers. And so if they're unpacking a unit and doing instructional unit planning, they're adding in background vocabulary. They're looking for ways they can link in the scaffolds to use. So there's that mutual benefit that's happening where even if I, as a special ed teacher, I have one co-teach partner, but not the other one is also benefiting by having those conversations and those structures and access to the same resources and scaffolds that they could use in their classroom. And that was a decision, again, like, people are saying it's more beneficial for us to have this PLC time. That's truly where we learn and grow as professionals, than to come to the library and hear a seminar for 45 minutes. Like, that's how we spend our time around professional growth is in our PLC team. So
yeah, it seems like that a lot of the conversations that I heard are a lot more macro, whereas whenever we meet, it's a lot more micro. Like, what are we going to do for this lesson? To where it's only beneficial to that one particular class.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't really have the structures of, the English department meeting and saying, well, these are the standards that we have for special education students for reading and writing that we could look at and then promote, for in the social studies classroom, and some of those social emotional needs that need to be that we could meet, and as a SPED department to look at for students in the general education setting and things like that. To be honest, I don't think many gen ed teachers know our students' goals. And what I saw, the goals that are laid out in the handbook, it would be easy for gen ed teachers to, even if they don't know their goals, to kind of know what, what the expectations are for special education students in their classroom.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes from, that PLC process is we got to narrow down what is most essential. And so our special ed teachers, that's where they're honing in their focus, right? We're going to make our goals aligned to standards. That's where kind of this learning progression idea developed, and really focused on those essentials. So those skills that you saw highlighted there, one of those data points is the special ed students outperformed. Well, they're spending potentially a lot more time and repetition on those particular skills than maybe the gen ed students are, because they're really trying to go as deep as they can on those absolute like most essential skills.
Yeah,
so,
it seems like the kind of thing too that as we have department meetings next year throughout the year, whenever there's not things that are being thrown up immediately that like we need to address as a department, kind of building some of these behavioral and social emotional skills that we can look at in the gen ed setting would be something that we could have conversations and build rubric around to kind of get out to the rest of the school.
Right. So one thing just to kind of, for maybe you guys to think about too, is, we made some targeted decisions around where those co-teach partnerships are happening, to happen in math, to happen in ELA, because in service specifically of our reading, writing, math eligibility areas. And I know obviously you can access that in science and history as well, but that for us was an important, I think, process to go through for a couple of reasons. Well, I think the primary reason is just the fear of getting spread too thin, right? The purpose of co-teach is really academic in nature. In fact, we've just kind of gone through a couple of years where we started putting too many kids into those co-teach classes, kids with some of the social emotional needs, organizational needs. And this year really had a lot of imbalances across our master schedule and just created a lot of struggle like all over the place. So one of the resources that is let me share this again. One of the resources that's linked in the document for today is our co-teach placement guide document. And again, this is an example of this is a particular tool that was developed because of a need that arose this year, where we said, okay, we can't have quite so many kids with IEPs just into a co-teach class. That changes the heterogeneity of that group, and so there's a tipping point where we start to lose the value and the benefit to all kids, including our students with IEPs. So we made the choice this year, and so we'll see how it goes. This is informing next year's planning to focus completely on the highest needs academic. It's kind of that idea of what is the special ed teacher in this setting? What service are they providing that a para could not provide? Because that's another part of our continuum is our paras are assigned by students. So we go through a process in the spring when we're looking at our special ed data around identifying for kids. Are they going to be best served in a co-teach setting? Could they be served with the support of a para, or could they be given SDI from a gen ed teacher because of some of the co-planning and resources that you guys we've talked about already. So that's sort of our general continuum. And so a lot of the kids we were able to filter out because we are very confident in our paras being able to run learning routines, for example, helping a kid identify what's your learning target, what's your task, do a little reflection at the end, or when are you initiating the task and monitoring growth on that and prompting. A lot of our kids with some of those organizational pieces that have ended up in co-teach, we've tried to filter out and say, okay, special ed teacher, you're the learning strategies person. You're really trying to help kids kind of on the lower end academically to make progress on those learning progressions. So we'll see how it goes. This is, like I said, this is kind of a tool that was developed this spring. So I see some things in the chat, so I'm gonna, oh, okay. As Cassie goes, I definitely would love to have you guys out if that works at some point next year. So she had mentioned that earlier, but.
Yeah, we had tried to get something scheduled in March, April of 2020, and yeah, just,
yep. Yeah, exactly.
We're not.
Okay, what feels valuable in terms of, let's process here for a little bit. What are you guys thinking? What other questions? I know there's things probably I haven't addressed yet, so.
And as everybody's thinking, Jonathan, I kind of want to throw or come back to a question when you shared the handbook, and it's just a really good example of a working document and how teachers in there. So I was wondering, as you're sharing all these artifacts, how often is that updated, and who are kind of responsible parties who kind of jump in there and take ownership of that? Because yeah, again, it's just a great working document. They're all housed in one spot for everybody to access, which is unusual for a handbook, right?
That's a good question, Riri. I don't think that's been updated probably in a year, so we probably need to do that. And I mean, we put that handbook together really for the purposes of these visits and then kind of as a side benefit, just knowing that those resources are all there, we can kind of refer back to it as well. So so yeah, it's probably in need of an update. One of the things, I'll actually reshare my screen here as I pulled it up, and because Rena Marie had mentioned master schedule. So one of the things, for example, this is an old master schedule, and you'll see kind of down here, we've got down at the bottom, can I use where's the fancy, like, I guess it's just to annotate her, not a, okay. You guys, at the very bottom, the green and the blue lines, you guys see that? Those are our two special ed teachers. So you can see kind of, they align up at the top. Up until this year, we've had staffing that's been allocated for basically tier 3, we call them tier 3 needs. It's really a reading support class that previously did have kids come out of electives classes, one for reading, one for math, but it's not a special ed class, it's a gen ed class. Really what we had identified for students that are level 1 on SBA, that was kind of our initial filter. And then over the years, we've actually had too many kids at that level, so we've had to kind of hone in. We lost that support class. So good question. We don't have any sort of specialists. We have people that have reading specialties in their backgrounds, but these are our, on our math side, we have one of our math teachers covering at each grade level this tier 3 support class. And I think in one case there, you can see the way we used to run it. One of our special ed teachers teamed up with our math teachers as a combination of special ed and gen ed students in there. And so yeah, go ahead.
I want to clarify, are the tier 3 classes, ELA classes and math classes in addition to the other regular gen ed math and ELA, or is this in substitute?
No, they're in addition to. So the cost side of that to kids was they would frequently lose their electives. Like they would come.
That was my next question. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked a lot about that too.
Yeah. So this is the, like Robin said, the good that comes out of the hardship of like some different things that we've lost, right? Like we've lost staffing, so as a result, we lost this tier 3 model this year. But what we literally yesterday made the decision on with our staff, we've had in our bell schedule, an intervention like 25-minute period that allows for, it's a flexible scheduling model. So teams of teachers they have different priority days and kids can flow. Basically it's actually really complicated, but it didn't start out that way. It was literally at the start was can we have some extra time for kids to do their work, whatever, and that's where it started. And then it evolved over several years to where now there's this rotation, there's grade level content area that kids can go through where they get rostered or prioritized based on a reteaching need that has emerged over the last, like kind of the prior week. So anyway, we lost that. Obviously this year we were not able to do that with distance learning. That's coming back into our schedule next year, but we are also able to carve out a 20-minute chunk of what we're calling tier 3 intervention / connection time. And so what that is going to be is a replacement for these classes, right? So actually now all of our kids won't they won't lose electives. We will have probably between 40 and 50 kids in concentrated tier 3 intervention groups that are focused on basic skills. So our HOC time is what this this other intervention time is. That's all classroom generated work. So it's really more of a tier 1 strategy. It helps give kids extra time to finish work. If they've done poorly on an assessment, it gives them a chance to do additional practice or a reteaching and then retake that assessment. That's a tier 1. It truly is a tier 1 strategy for kind of doing the full teaching, reteaching cycle. And I'm super excited about this particular extra 20-minute chunk in our day next year, because we're going to be able to do, for our basic readers, we're going to have a special ed teacher pull those kids out, and it's a true intervention model, 20 minutes a day. We'll have the same for some of our ELL students. We'll have the same for a social, like our social emotional needs, which used to take up a section on our master schedule. Now we're able to pull that out of our master schedule, provided in this intervention time. And then that buys us an extra period of co-teach time in an academic area. So that's another example of like a particular need that came out of loss, right? Like, and this is sort of the like, okay, can we do this? So what happens to the rest of our kids? We don't know that yet, but it's basically like a team of people is going to build a structure that's basically like school-wide learning routines or social emotional learning, that it's not an extra prep for people. It's just facilitating whatever those routines are. So we'll see how that goes. That's another kind of new piece that'll need to be updated in here, but I'm really excited about that as a possibility here moving forward too. So, all right. You guys had wanted to see, oh, here's an example of our HOC time that I was describing. So you can see kind of the red is the priority for the grade level and the content area. We have somebody here who's like brilliant at like arranging time, one of our teacher leaders. And so we're able in this schedule to actually carve out a time like where every team is not working this HOC time. So they have that 25-minute time to just look at their student data and say, okay, to plan for who goes on the roster. So that felt like that was a big beast there. So you can see, and then the teachers that are not, kids that are not rostered, it gets cut off there, but there's a whole list of students that would be green below there on the page. And that's like combination of homework completion. We use iReady here, so the iReady practice time, that's the only class time really that we're dedicating to that is during that time. So there's just again, this is like a probably 5-year process to get to this level of organization. It did not start off that way, but this is a big part of what helps us kind of accomplish some of the reteaching along the way. So let me grab that bell schedule. So we have very little here resources in the way of coaching or intervention specialists or anything like that. So that's from our side. Like, on the one hand, we're given a lot of autonomy because there's not a lot of systems in place here as a district, just being a smaller district. So potentially a lot of the flexibility you've heard me talk about and innovation, the benefit of that has allowed for that. And then on the other hand, in terms of the resources side, we're frequently like looking around the room being like, okay, who's gonna do this, you know, or who has this like well of knowledge that we can draw on in order to like give kids something substantially different. And I think that's a big area of growth for us is sometimes in these structures, we're just like repeating some of the same things. We're not maybe using the best strategies to teach kids differently. So we definitely run up against some of our capacity, you know, when we hit some of those spots. But all right, what else? Sorry, there's some in the chat that, oh yeah, I was gonna grab the new bell schedule version. Is that right? Okay. And then if you guys go down, you can kind of scroll through, but this is the, is what I was talking about. Instead of a continuum of services, we just kind of talk about our special ed pyramid. If you were to dive deeply in this, all you realize is these are all the components of an IEP, right? Like who's providing the service, what do the accommodations look like? I guess the teaching focus isn't necessarily described there, but the sense of progress for students, that's a monitoring piece. So, and then as you go up the pyramid there, you can kind of see how some of that changes a little bit, but it's the same components. So, all right, let me stop my share for a second. I'm not quite ready to like give people this bell schedule because since it was just decided upon yesterday, I want to make sure we're for sure able to pull it off, but in concept, it's a really good idea. So I'll definitely at least show it to you. And then once I am able to share it, I am happy to. So.
And Jonathan, while you're doing that, I'll just note there's a good conversations in the chat about the advisory time and that you already have Titan time. So where can you leverage those systems that are already in place, right? Because there's still a lot of systems to create that aren't there, that infrastructure, but
yeah,
like that's one place to start.
Yeah. Tell me, so for you guys, the Titan time and the advisory time, is it different? They're two different things? And do they both happen every day, or are they offsetting days?
No, advisory, they're both every day. Advisory is we go over learning skills and social emotional skills, but it's everyone pretty much doing the same thing in the lessons. And Titan time is nutrition break.
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha. So our hawk time is that crazy, confusing, colorful thing that I showed you, right? Where the kids are rotating and getting that reteaching. This connection / intervention time, that's the new brainstorm for next year. So that sounds like what you're describing, Corey, as advisory, as far as what most kids will be doing, but we're just, you know, we know that there's a cost side to this as well, but it's sort of that prioritization on we need kids to be reading and we need them to be accessing core gen ed curriculum. So at some point there's going to be a cost somewhere, and so, you know, we know they'll miss out on like some of our second step stuff, and they'll miss out on some of those, but they'll also, in their own right, like they'll have a group of 7-8 kids that they're with every day that, you know, they can kind of build that support for each other and do group goal setting and all some of those like cultural pieces to the classroom experience for that small group of kids, like around reading, where they could be a big support, I think, for each other and actually fill some of those social emotional needs as well in that way. So this is what we're thinking about. I'm going to back up, like, just again, keep plugging the why piece, but like there's another model we were kind of looking at, but you know, a piece of this again is like coming back to like the primary problem, like what's the primary problem? Why does this problem exist? And then again, like how the proposed schedule. So this is sort of a glance into like when we're trying to make a decision like this, just coming back to the why, like how does this align with what our goals are as a school? So here, I'll put the schedule back up for you.
Yeah, and Jonathan, when you talk about that, coming back to the why, it just makes you think about your mission and vision. And so how North Shore Middle School, is that something that you feel like you're like school-based kind of really synced up on that inclusion mission and vision, or?
No.
Okay, yeah.
Ultimately, we have pockets around and there's probably a lot in common with them, but it's not a shared one that we've created together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is clear and defined and focused.
What's the nature of just what collaboration looks like at North Shore right now?
Wild West.
Yeah, kind of maybe in pockets, but not necessarily. Okay.
There's a lot, like there's a lot of there's a lot of people at North Shore Middle School that have been there for a very long time, and then there's people. There's a lot of younger educators and people like me who's a transplant. You know that like are coming in, and so there's a lot of varying experiences and philosophy behind teaching, and everyone's, a lot of people are at different places whenever it comes to inclusion, and you know what's worked in the past and what we've seen in the experience of. I've heard a lot about people seeing the pendulum in special education in the district swing back and forth from whenever there was inclusion was being pushed 20 some odd years ago, where they're building schools based on it. And then they're like, oh, that didn't really work. So then we go back to, and now this is just the next push for inclusion before ultimately the pendulum's going to swing back again. That's kind of how it's viewed by some.
Yeah. I mean, that to me sounds like you guys are really ripe for some of that cultural work that we've talked a lot about.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree.
What does that look like for you guys to lead that from your own particular seat on the bus, and then also to maybe advocate for that with your administrative team?
One of the things that the people lean on is the contract language, where co-teaching isn't anything that anyone has to do. It has to be something that's agreed upon. So you're getting the same people that are shouldering that extra work to try to do things what's best for kids, and it just creates an atmosphere where it's the same people taking on more work, and it's not really building a culture. It's doing something individually to help an individual like pocket of students.
I don't think it's just that either, because I feel like we don't really have a framework that we stick to.
No.
Our SPED administration, we were like, when we were talking about Marilyn Friend, we loved her presentation and the framework she had in the book, and we were all bought into it. And then they started bringing out different programs, and a speaker come out and talk about this framework, and then we never see them again. And it's like, if we had something built, if we had a model that we could follow, and it was like really supported, then I think there would be more buy-in. Because I think I'm starting to get a little bit bitter when I am like working on this thing year after year, and then they just go, oh, try this one now. And it's like, okay, well, and I'm just jumping ship again. Like, we're just going to build a new thing next year. And it just feels like all the work just gets washed away and we're not building anything.
Yeah, that's so frustrating, and it doesn't seem intentional, that work, if it's like moving this in. So where's that intentional kind of growth? And I definitely am just really struck with the commitment and the compassion of this group, but there's a lot of work to be done over there too. And so as we start thinking about like what are some kind of, I know you all have been sharing, but other kind of small next steps of where you can get started. Like we've got a super team here.
Mm-hmm. Well, you guys, I mean, I think you're asking the right questions for sure. I think that's a great sign. I think what I'm hearing is a desire for coherence and cohesion across the system, which is honestly, that's our our desire as well. And I know that, you know, there's things that probably feel like they're coming to people from left field and really random, but maybe that might be sort of that advocacy piece, right? When you're saying, hey, we're a core team that really sees this as a critical part of our work for meeting the needs of all kids. What is this, what teaming with your administrative team is today, what does this look like to really either connect it to a cohesive plan, or are we in need of like really creating a cohesive plan? And then, so that might be something you could consider in terms of your collaboration, even with that part of your learning community there at North Shore. So one of the things I think is, okay, somebody was about to say something, I think. No? What do you guys feel like are your, so one of the things we always are challenged by whenever we visit another school, or the thing that has kind of been a compelling, like, oh yeah, great, is this idea of just like, we've seen something that is from a completely different context. Typically that comes with like this fire hose of information and lots of ideas and spinning. And I think where it's been really effective for us is when somebody challenges us, like, okay, what's your baby step? Like, where do you go from here? That's a manageable, like incremental step. So I don't know if there's something that kind of comes to mind. Love to hear it. If there is something, maybe you guys, and maybe that's something you guys talk about together too, outside of this open house context. So
my big takeaway today is definitely the goal banks for students in a gen ed setting, and creating, I think centering it, to me, it gives focus to our special education department meetings next year, where it's something that we could focus on each, something to focus on each meeting. Like, all right, let's look at what's needed, and what's needed behaviorally in a gen ed classroom for students to be successful. What's needed social emotional, and building kind of the template or the goal bank based on some of those things that could be communicated and understood by all, instead of standalone, like it, because it's individual to each student, and that's kind of how we write our goals. But as far as like having something uniform that's easily communicated to the rest of the teachers, that's easily understood. It shouldn't just be me understanding what the goal is trying to say.
I love that, Corey. I was thinking that those goals, and even just the standard goals that the team had that we were watching, would really pair nicely together, because if we are having as a content area these standards goals that we're looking at, and then we have IEP goals that are also standards based, then they go together and they can be understood. Because like you said earlier, some people don't know their students' IEP goals, but I would push back on that a bit. I would say a lot of the goals are very unclear and unspecific.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's really difficult to know how we are supposed to support them.
Well, whenever they're each individual, like based individually after students, and you have 25 students on IEPs in class, in all of your classes, yeah, it'd be very difficult. I didn't mean it to be backhanded. Whenever I
make it like that, I'm just adding another sprinkle on there. I would never. I also am loving, I mean, just similarly, like to push the standards-based grading as well, because I really do think that all three of those are pretty foundational to be able to work together across content areas and especially within gen and sped programs. So that's a huge one.
And just a quick note on both of those things, Callie, just because you just talked about the grading, we specifically steered away. We talked about the phrase grading for learning, and that well, actually it relates to what I was going to say about yours, Corey. What you just did is a move around locus of control, right? You made and we talk about that a lot here too, is what's the next step? What's the thing that we can focus on, what we can control in the change management process? And so, man, IEP goals is a hugely underutilized lever that we can control. You can build that programmatic stuff out around your IEP goals, and all of a sudden maybe not even only are you seeing that for the kids that are accessing gen ed as much, but as you look at, can we use some of these goals for some of our students in the mid-level and some of these other places, in order for them to accomplish those goals, they then start having to access those gen ed settings, right? So it's a great.
Yeah, I know like some of our goals are written in the LC like about reaching grade level standard, but it doesn't necessarily spell out what the grade level standards are.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yep. So the locus of control around grading for us, Callie, has been, I mean, we use Skyward, and it's really like so oriented towards just a traditional grading model. But what we do have control of is our practices. We do have control of the things like good assessment practices. Are we aligning those assessments to the standards so that what is reported out, are we, I mean, this is an emotional topic, but like, are we giving zeros? Or are we letting the 0 through 59% inadvertently drag the grade book? Because that's statistically what it does. There's a little bias reveal for you there. So, I mean, for us, our 0 is 55%. And so we anchored, and this comes out, there's a book by Tom Schimmer that's called Grading from the Inside Out. I'll put that in here.
Whenever Callie talks about Wild West, those are the kinds of conversations that there's big disagreements on.
Yep, absolutely. And that's where you'll need support and vision from your admin team on that type of work. I know that's super emotional work, but in the end of the day, like, raise your hand how many classes you took in your master's program around grading and how to keep a grade book. Like, mine was 0, right? So it's this weird like emotional attachment to it, and yet we have 0 information about how to do it well.
But we also have, it's a very contract language driven school as well. And if that's not in the contract, if there's nothing in the contract about what the base is for a grade book, then there'd be a lot of threats about grievances about what building admin can actually
are allowed. Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. So that comes back again to that cultural work around who's this helping, who's this harming. Every decision we make, every system that we build, there's a group that it's helping, and there's a group that it's harming. And we hold, regardless of what we do, that's always going to be the case. And so the goal always, I think, is just trying to get to where we're minimizing harm.
Hard conversations and speaking truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
anyway, yeah, that